My name is Slate Monroe. I am 33 years old. A man's worth is not found in what people see. It is found in what he quietly holds together when no one is looking. I ran a coffee shop on Baltimore Avenue in West Philadelphia. Nothing fancy, just honest coffee. Good conversations. A counter worn smooth by 2 decades of elbows and early mornings. The regulars called it root and rise. I called it home. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, my wife walked through that front door holding a stack of divorce papers, with another man standing behind her like a period at the end of a sentence. What no one in that shop understood yet, including my wife, was that the man she was walking away from was not the man she thought she had married. And what she was about to set in motion would cost her more than she could calculate standing there in those heels on that worn tile floor. It was the particular kind of early that belongs only to West Philadelphia in November. The city still half asleep, light coming in sideways through the front windows, laying long gold stripes across the old floor. I had been up since 4:30. I always was. Mr. Earl was already waiting outside when I unlocked the front door. 70 years old, retired city bus driver. Same brown tweed cap every morning. Said it had belonged to his father. I never doubted it. "Morning, Slate." "Morning, Mr. Earl. The usual?" He gave me the look he always gave me when I asked that question. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. Enough hot water to make his doctor lose sleep. 6 years. Same order. Same stool. Root and rise held people. Nurses finishing overnight shifts from Penn Presbyterian. Drivers off the early routes on Market Street. Older women from the Mantua Block Association who met every Tuesday to talk about everything and solve almost nothing and feel better for it. There was one thing the regulars had learned not to ask me about: the property notices. Every few months, a letter arrived from some law office or title company downtown. I would fold it without reading it in front of anyone, slip it into my apron pocket, keep working. Mr. Earl always noticed. He never said a word. That was one of the things I appreciated most about him. I was halfway through a fresh pour when the bell above the door rang differently. I cannot explain it better than that. It just rang differently. My wife walked in, the sharp blazer, the heels, her hair done the way she only did it when she needed to feel powerful. Behind her, hands easy in his pockets and a smile too wide for this neighborhood, was Marcus Langston. A man who talked loudly about serving community while quietly calculating what it was worth. Azalea stopped in the middle of the floor, where everyone could see her, and held up the papers. The shop went quiet. "Slate," controlled, practiced. "You're a coffee shop. I need to build a real career. We don't fit anymore. Sign it. I want you out of the house by tomorrow morning." Not a request, a verdict, delivered in front of every person who had sat at my counter for 6 years. I had already had these pages reviewed 3 days earlier. Imani had passed along word that the papers were coming. I had spoken with an attorney on Walnut Street the previous afternoon. My decision was made long before Azalea walked through that door. I wiped my hands on the counter towel, reached across, took the papers. I signed every page, quietly, without a word. Then, before Azalea turned to leave, I slipped a small sealed envelope into the side pocket of her coat. No one saw me do it. Mr. Earl leaned forward, voice low enough for only the 2 of us. "You did the right thing, son. Big Mama told you this day would come." I gave him the faintest smile. Outside, November rain tapped against the glass, soft, patient, in no hurry. I turned back to the espresso machine and kept working. "Stay right here." Because what Azalea carried out of that shop was only the first piece of a truth she was nowhere near ready to hold. A marriage does not always end with a slammed door. Sometimes it ends the way erosion happens, So gradually, you do not notice the ground shifting until you reach for something that used to be there and find nothing. Azalea and I had been married 4 years. In the beginning, she came into Root and Rise on Saturday mornings, sat at the corner table with her laptop, nursed a latte for 3 hours. She would look up at me sometimes with a small, private smile, like we shared something no one else in the room was in on. I lived for that smile. Then came the promotion at her firm on Market Street, and everything began, slowly, to tilt. One evening she stood in our kitchen with a fatigue I had not seen before. Not tiredness, something more arrived at. Psychologists call this status incongruence, the discomfort of an inner circle that no longer reflects the identity you are building in the outside world. Azalea had not stopped caring for Slate. She had started measuring him against a ruler she picked up somewhere else. "You should think about selling Root and Rise," she said. "Developers would pay good money for that corner lot." Big Mama bought that land in 2011, right when Brewery Town started drawing outside money. I'm just honoring what she built. Something shifted in her face when I said Big Mama's name. She had met her only twice. The second time, Big Mama had held Azalea's hands and said quietly, "You married a man with deep roots, baby. Don't let anybody convince you that roots aren't worth as much as height." Azalea had laughed politely then. Standing in our kitchen now, I watched her decide not to remember it. She changed the subject. She did not push the question of selling again, but she did not meet my eyes for the rest of the evening. Marcus Langston's project was a sweeping development corridor through West Philadelphia, Mantua into Brewery Town, which he described as bringing new energy to neighborhoods that, in his telling, had simply been waiting for the right vision to arrive. He said it with the confidence of a man who had never lived in the place he was proposing to transform. Azalea began repeating his language. Untapped potential, strategic relocation, generational wealth building. The phrases arrived in our conversations with a certainty that told me she had decided somewhere along the way that they were true. This is how influence operates at its most effective. Not through argument, but through repeated exposure until borrowed ideas begin to feel like original ones. My wife moved several suitcases to Marcus's apartment in Center City. Temporary, she said. She needed space to think. She delivered the words carefully, like someone who had rehearsed them in the mirror. I did not argue. I kept opening the shop. That night, after Marcus's gathering at our house broke up and Azalea had gone upstairs, I was washing glasses when my phone buzzed. Imani's secondary line, the one she used when she needed things kept separate from the shop. A photo, no caption. A building permit application under a shell company I did not recognize. Attached, a handwritten list of addresses in Mantua, Black-owned homes, long-established small businesses, each paired with a buyout figure that told the whole story in one column of numbers. I set the phone down. I knew every one of those addresses. 3 of those families had been coming into Root and Rise before I ever took over the counter. I called Imani back. "City Records Office," she said before I could ask. "Public filing. You just have to know the right name to search." And you knew it. I've been watching Marcus Langston for 6 months. I did not ask why she had started watching. I already knew. Imani had always understood this neighborhood the way Big Mama had, as something worth protecting before someone else decided it needed saving. 2 days before the forum, Imani called again. "Marcus confirmed his slot. He still doesn't know you're on the program." "Good. The organizers kept your name off the public schedule, same as you asked. As far as Marcus knows, tonight is his night." A pause. "You want it to stay that way until they call your name?" "Until the very moment," I said. The next morning I opened Root and Rise at 5:30. Mr. Earl at the door, Mrs. Patterson waving from across Baltimore Avenue. 2 nurses in from the rain. I made their coffee. I listened. I remembered their names. And underneath all of that ordinary morning, I had already set in motion things I had been quietly building toward for years. Azalea left this marriage because Slate owned a coffee shop. No title, no penthouse, no corner office. But behind that counter, he had been quietly holding her entire family together for years. And she never knew. If you found out someone had been secretly protecting your family, paying bills, covering tuition, caring for your mother, and you had already walked away from them, would you feel grateful? Or would the guilt be something you could barely sit with? Drop a 1. Azalea deserved to know the truth from the beginning. 2. Slate was right to give quietly, no strings, no score. Or leave your story. Have you ever been the one who gave everything and no one noticed? Stay with us, because what happens next in that kitchen on Parrish Street is something Azalea was not prepared for. 2 weeks later, they came to the house together, Azalea in the gray blazer, the armor one, Marcus in his watch that caught every available light, which I suspected was intentional. They settled across from me like people who had already agreed on the outcome and were waiting for the formality to finish. Marcus leaned back, easy, certain. Just sign it, man. Azalea deserves someone who can take her to Center City, not some coffee shop in West Philly. Psychologists call this reframing dominance, using someone else's definition of success to make a confident person doubt their worth. It only works on people who need the room's approval to feel certain of themselves. Slate did not. I looked at him, then at my wife. She was studying the surface of the kitchen table. Shame gaze aversion. People don't look away from things that don't affect them. They look away from what costs them the most to face. I signed every page, same calm as the first time, when the pen touched the table. The soft click was the only sound in the room. Then I placed an envelope between us, sealed, heavier than it looked. "Open it," I said. She picked it up with slightly uncertain hands, as if some part of her already knew it would require something she was not ready to give. She pulled out the papers and began to read. Stillness first, then the frown, then understanding broke everything open all at once. Her hands began to tremble. 4 complete years of tuition payments for her younger sister Lila, routed anonymously to Drexel University's College of Medicine on North 32nd Street. Every semester, every fee, no name, no return address. Behind those, 3 years of medical invoices for her mother, Mrs. Vivian. All settled, all anonymous, all of it paid. None of it ever mentioned. And at the back, a photograph, faded at the corners from being held many times. Me at 26, in the Great Hall of the African American Museum on North 7th Street. Beside me, laughing at something just outside the frame, a girl of about 14. Lila, before the white coat, when she was still just her sister's kid sibling with a dream. On the back, in my handwriting, "This little girl deserves to study medicine in Philadelphia." The money had not come from the coffee shop. Big Mama had established a private family trust in 2009, put in place quietly, years before anyone thought to ask why a woman who drove a 20-year-old Buick seemed to own so much of West Philadelphia outright. I had been sole trustee since her passing. I used it the way she would have. Without announcement, without conditions, without keeping score. Psychologists call this non-contingent giving. Generosity with zero expectation of return, the rarest form of love, and almost impossible to recognize until it is no longer in the room. What shattered Azalea was not guilt in the ordinary sense. It was this: the independence she had been so proud of, the sense of climbing on her own terms, had been quietly cushioned by the man she just handed divorce papers to. She had not climbed alone. She had climbed while he held the ladder. She had simply never looked down. Marcus sat very still. The watch had stopped catching the light. Azalea's breath came out in one long exhale, the kind that escapes when something structural gives way inside a person. Your sister and your mother never knew where the money came from, I said. You didn't know either, because I never wanted anyone to feel like they owed something. Her eyes had gone bright and full. I signed because you asked me to. But hold on to one thing. I paused, not for effect, but because the words needed to land right. A lot of what felt like your momentum these past years, the ground that held steady while you were building, I had been quietly keeping that in place. Not to own it, because your family was my family. That's the only reason. The people who hold the most weight rarely announce what they are carrying. We recognize their value only when the weight disappears and the floor shifts beneath us. Azalea looked at me. This time she did not look away. What I saw in her eyes was not love, not in any recoverable sense. Something raw, the irreversible recognition of a person you have fundamentally misread. Slate. I raised one hand, gently. Finished. You should go. You have everything you came for. She gathered the papers slowly. At the door she stopped and turned back once. I was already facing the window. Marcus left without a word. I sat alone at the kitchen table. After a while, I washed the cups. Then I called Imani. How do you feel? She asked. Like something that needed to be done is done. A short silence. The convention center is in 10 days. I looked out at Parish Street. November rain. Quiet. Patient. Everything's been in place for a long time, I said. Azalea thought she had finally seen the whole truth. She had seen one layer. What was waiting 10 days later, in front of the entire city of Philadelphia, would change what she knew about Slate Monroe and what she knew about herself. 10 days later, Philadelphia showed up. The West Philadelphia Community Development Forum at the Pennsylvania Convention Center on Arch Street drew the kind of room that only assembles when serious money is in motion. Investors, city council members, nonprofit directors, journalists from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and a carefully assembled group of people who had been quietly deciding, in meeting rooms across Center City, what West Philadelphia was going to look like for the next 50 years. The lighting was excellent. The coffee was not. And the room carried that particular charged energy of people who believe themselves to be on the right side of something historical. Azalea arrived with Marcus. They entered the way Marcus preferred to enter any room, with unhurried deliberateness. Visible alignment. The specific kind of confidence designed to be noticed by everyone and acknowledged by the right people. His watch caught the overhead lights. Her hand rested in the crook of his arm. She had chosen the black dress she reserved for evenings that needed to mean something. She looked certain. She looked exactly like the person she had spent the past year deciding to become. Psychologists call what happened to Azalea identity substitution. When external pressure is sustained long enough, a person stops asking who they are and starts performing who their environment rewards. She had not become a different woman. She had become a woman wearing a costume so long she had forgotten it was one. Tonight, that costume was about to meet something it was not built to withstand. What Marcus did not know, what no one in that room except Imani and the forum's organizing committee knew, was that his presentation slot had been scheduled first. At his own insistence. He had lobbied for the early position, believing it would set the evening's frame before anyone else could challenge it. He had lobbied for it. He had gotten it. And then, 3 weeks later, I had accepted the keynote slot that followed. Imani had suggested it. I had agreed. We had asked the committee to keep my name entirely off the public program until the evening itself. The organizers, several of whom had been Root and Rise regulars for years, who had sat at my counter on Tuesday mornings before any of this began, had been more than willing to accommodate the request. Marcus had walked into this room believing it was his stage. He had built the setup himself, without knowing it. I was at the back of the room when they arrived, standing with Mr. Earl, who had asked to come and whom I would not have considered leaving behind. He wore his brown tweed cap and his good Sunday coat, and carried the settled dignity of a man who has watched his neighborhood described as underutilized by outside voices for 40 years and is still standing on the same block where he was born. I wore the charcoal gray suit, clean, right for the moment, nothing that announced itself. Imani stood nearby, arms folded lightly, reading the room the way she always did, cataloging everything, registering nothing on her face. Across the floor, Azalea saw me. I watched her blink, watched her compose herself, that small, visible effort of pulling an expression back into something controlled. She leaned toward Marcus and said something I could not hear. Marcus looked over. The smile did not disappear, but it tightened, just slightly, just enough. What Azalea felt in that moment was cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of two incompatible truths existing simultaneously. Her internal story said Slate was limited, easily left behind. But Slate standing in that room, calm, unhurried, belonging entirely to himself, was a fact her story could not absorb. The mind does not rest easily when reality refuses to match the narrative it has built. About 15 minutes before his presentation, Marcus stepped into the east corridor to take a phone call. I was passing through that hallway. I was not trying to overhear. He was simply not trying to keep it down. How did this happen? Low, controlled. The voice of a man holding panic at arm's length by pure discipline. I told you, the real ownership of the West Philly Land Fund stays completely off the record. Who made that call? Do you understand what this does to everything tonight? He listened. Then, lower. Find out. Tonight. He came back into the main hall. The particular color of certainty had drained from his face. He leaned close to Azalea, said something brief. She frowned and scanned the room until she found me at the back. I gave Mr. Earl a small nod. "Ready?" he asked, quiet and steady. "Always have been," I said. "I want you to hold that name in the room for just a second before I tell you what happened next." When the host stepped to the microphone and announced the keynote speaker, the room changed. Slate Monroe. It moved through the crowd like a current. That collective, involuntary recalibration of a room that realizes, all at once, it has been misreading a situation. Phones came out. People turned to their neighbors. Near the front, Azalea rose to her feet. I do not think she meant to stand. I think her body moved before her mind gave it permission. I walked to the podium, took a breath, and told the truth. For 5 years, I had been the largest silent landowner in West Philadelphia. Not by accident and not by luck, but through a plan Big Mama had begun in 2008, when she watched the first signs of displacement moving toward the neighborhood she had lived in for 50 years. She had seen it happen to other communities, in other cities. She recognized the pattern, the friendly language, the lowball offers, the quiet pressure on families who had nowhere else to go. And she made a decision. This community was not going to be bought out of its own history on her watch. Or on mine. She started acquiring properties along Baltimore Avenue and into Brewery Town. I continued what she built, expanding it carefully and quietly over the years that followed. 17 properties across West Philadelphia and Mantua, a community loan fund that had delivered capital to 32 Black-owned small businesses over the past 3 years. A scholarship pipeline, anonymous, no name attached, that had helped 14 young people from these streets reach medical school, law school, and graduate programs across Pennsylvania. And the Big Mama Family Trust, established by my grandmother in 2009 and managed by me since her passing, had been the financial foundation beneath all of it. And Root and Rise Coffee, the shop my wife had once called just a coffee shop, had been the operational center of every piece of it. The place where community information moved the way it has always moved, in neighborhoods that know how to protect themselves, through trust, through consistency, through the understanding that the most durable power is usually the kind that nobody in a glass-walled convention room ever thinks to look for. Here is the hardest truth this story holds. We are wired to value what is visible, what is named, displayed, celebrated, feels real. What is quiet, anonymous, and structural tends to feel like nothing, or at best, like background. Psychologists call this the visibility bias. We assign worth based on what presents itself clearly and discount what operates out of sight. A man in a tailored suit at a development forum reads as powerful. A man behind a coffee counter reads as ordinary. But the suit and the counter are not the men. They are only what we let our eyes stop at before we decide we have seen enough. The question worth sitting with is a simple one. How many people in your own life have you underestimated or walked away from simply because they did not display their value in the language you were trained to recognize? Marcus sat in the front row like a man watching a structure he spent years building quietly come apart at its foundation. I glanced at him once, looked away, because what I had left to say was not for Marcus. I am announcing tonight the creation of the Big Mama Community Land Trust, I said. My voice held steady. These were words I had rehearsed, but the weight behind them was entirely real. This trust will permanently protect residential and commercial land in West Philadelphia and neighboring communities from speculative displacement. It will prioritize families with children in higher education, families caring for aging parents, and small businesses that have kept these streets alive for generations. I paused. I looked directly at Azalea. Because some mothers, I said quietly, and some sisters deserve a better life, and they always did. One full second of absolute silence. Then the room came alive. Notice where Slate's eyes went in that final moment. Not to the investors, not to the journalists, not to the city officials, but to Azalea. Not to humiliate her, because those words had always been for her family. Every property deed, every anonymous payment, every early morning at that counter had been threaded, quietly and without announcement, through genuine love for the people she loved most. Psychologists call this altruistic consistency, values expressed not in declarations, but in the daily, unwitnessed practice of doing what you believe is right, regardless of whether anyone will ever know. The most powerful thing about Slate was never the land or the money. It was that none of it changed who he was in the room when no one was watching. Azalea sat back down slowly, the kind of slow that happens when the body absorbs something the mind is still catching up to. One tear moved down her face. She did not try to stop it. She did not try to hide it. Marcus did not speak again for the remainder of the evening. I did not stay for the handshakes. I never needed what a room full of applause has to offer. But what happened in the East Corridor just after I stepped off that stage, what Imani said to me quietly, with no one else nearby, completed a circle I had not even known was still open. I found the east corridor of the convention center the way you find quiet anywhere, by walking toward it deliberately, away from the noise. It was one of those long, carpeted hallways that large buildings always have, the kind that feel like they exist outside of time, removed from whatever is unfolding in the rooms around them. I stood there for a moment with my jacket open and the evening finally behind me, letting the stillness settle over me. Imani followed. She did not speak right away. She stood beside me the way she always had, grounded, steady, present. In the same way she had been standing beside me since long before Root and Rise existed, since long before anyone in Center City knew my name. After a moment, she tilted her head and looked at me with that careful, measured expression of hers. The one that always meant she was about to say something she had been carrying for a while. "Are you ever going to tell her," she said quietly, "that Big Mama was the one who introduced you to my parents at the African American Museum 7 years ago?" I looked at her. There are moments when a truth you have known for a long time lands on you all at once with new weight. This was one of them. Big Mama had brought me to the African American Museum of Philadelphia on North 7th Street on a specific evening 7 years earlier, with a specific intention, the way she did most things she considered important. She had introduced me to Imani's family without ceremony, without explanation, without telling me what she thought would come of it. She simply set two things in motion and stepped back, the way a gardener plants something and trusts the soil. Imani had been in my life since that evening. She had been present through every year of building, every quiet decision, every morning when I was simply the man who made coffee on Baltimore Avenue and nobody in any glass office on Market Street knew my name or cared to. She had never asked me to explain myself. She had never needed me to be more visible in order to understand what I was doing. She had simply stayed. Not because of what I was worth in the language the world recognized, because she knew who I was. I gave her a real smile, the kind that costs something. "There's no need to tell her anymore," I said. "The right people already know." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she gave me the small, warm smile that meant she was at peace with something. "I always knew," she said quietly, "from the very first morning." We stood in that corridor for a little while longer, two people from West Philadelphia, inside a building full of cameras and city officials and serious money, finding the one hallway that felt like it belonged entirely to us. In the 3 days that followed the forum, I heard nothing from Azalea directly, but I heard, through the quiet network of people who had always kept an eye on this neighborhood, that she had not returned to Marcus's apartment, that she had been staying at her mother's house on Arch Street, that Mrs. Vivian, who had been keeping the contents of that envelope close since the night Azalea brought it home, had sat with her daughter for a very long time. Some conversations take years to arrive. Some of them only need one envelope. The morning after the forum, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran the story, not the headline some smaller outlets reached for, the ones that reduced everything to a single dramatic number. The Inquirer ran something more careful, more true. West Philadelphia's quiet guardian, the man behind the Big Mama Community Land Trust. They understood what the story actually was. I read it at Root and Rise before the shop opened. Over coffee I made for myself the way I always made it, without ceremony, at the machine I had been running since the beginning. Mr. Earl knocked on the glass at 6:15. Some routines exist outside of business hours, and both of us understood that. So I unlocked the door and let him in. He read the article slowly, standing beside the counter, his tweed cap still on. When he reached the end, he set the paper down and was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man weighing something before he speaks it. "Your grandmother would be very pleased," he said. "She'd be real proud, Slate." I nodded. I did not trust myself to say much more than that. We sat together in the early light, the two of us, the smell of coffee, the old tile floor, the photographs on the wall. And we let the morning do what mornings in West Philadelphia do when they are given a little room. They settle, they hold, they remind you, without a word, of everything worth protecting. Marcus Langston's development project collapsed within the month. Without access to the land corridor his financing model had been built around. Land that, as it turned out, had been held by the Big Mama Community Land Trust for years. His investors withdrew quietly and without public comment. Two of the families in Mantua whose addresses had appeared on that handwritten list later told me, separately, that the buyout pressure had stopped entirely the week after the forum. Marcus relocated to Atlanta. I heard he had a new project, new language, a new neighborhood to describe as underserved. That was the thing about men like Marcus. They did not stop. They simply found the next place where nobody had gotten there first. In West Philadelphia, someone had. 3 days after the forum, Azalea came to Root and Rise. I had not reached out to her. I had not expected her to come. But there she was at the glass door at 9 in the morning, in a coat I recognized from 3 years earlier. Before the gray blazers and the Center City wardrobe and everything those things had represented, she looked quieter in it, more like the person I had first known. I unlocked the door and let her in. She stood near the counter and looked around the shop slowly, at the photographs along the wall, the names chalked on the order board, the worn floor that had held 20 years of West Philadelphia underneath it. She looked at it all the way you look at something you misread for a long time and are finally, clearly, seeing. "I owe you an apology," she said, "not for wanting something more from my life, but for the way I decided that wanting more meant you had to be less." That was a more precise accounting than I had expected. It told me she had been sitting with this for more than 3 days. Most apologies describe what happened. Hers described the mechanism, the specific cognitive move she had made. Psychologists call it zero-sum thinking, the unconscious belief that someone else's smallness is required to justify your own growth. It is one of the most common and least examined errors in how we treat the people closest to us. "You were right that we wanted different things," I said. "You were wrong about what kind of man I was." She nodded slowly. Something in her had settled. Not into happiness, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but into honesty, which is where most real things have to begin. "How is Lila?" I asked, for the first time since she had walked in. Azalea's eyes went soft. "She defended her research last week," she said. "First in her cohort." "Good," I said, and I meant it completely. She left a few minutes later. I held the door for her. An old habit, the kind that outlasts everything it was originally attached to. She paused on the threshold for just a moment, her hand on the doorframe. "Thank you, Slate," she said, "for all of it, even the parts I didn't know about." "That's what family does," I said simply. She walked out into a bright Philadelphia morning. I locked the door, stood still for a moment in the empty shop, and understood, clearly and without drama, that something had ended the way it was supposed to end. Not happily in the storybook sense, truthfully, which is better. What Imani and I built after that morning, and what West Philadelphia became because of it, is the part of this story I most want to leave with you. I did not sell Root and Rise coffee. The offers came quickly. Investors, developers, people who now understood what that corner lot on Baltimore Avenue was worth. I declined every one. I repainted the front door a deep, warm green, the same shade Big Mama had put on her door on Westminster Avenue in 1987. Fixed the bell above the entrance, which had been rattling loose for 2 years. Replaced 2 counter stools that had finally given out. Left everything else exactly as it was. Before I tell you what came next, I want to tell you about Big Mama, because this story belongs to her more than it belongs to anyone else. She was a short woman with wide hands and the kind of stillness that made rooms feel smaller than they were. She never raised her voice. When she spoke, people listened the way you listen to something you know you will need to remember. She had grown up in Mantua in the 1950s, watched two neighborhoods she loved get dismantled in the name of progress, watched families she had known her whole life pack up and disappear into parts of the city that were not built for them. She absorbed all of that without bitterness, made a decision, quiet, permanent, entirely her own, that she would spend the rest of her life making sure it did not happen to a third. She bought her first property at 54, drove a 20-year-old Buick until she died, established her family trust in 2009. Not so I would be wealthy, but so I would be able to protect something worth protecting. She raised me after my parents were gone. She taught me how to make coffee. She introduced me, on a specific evening at the African American Museum, to a young woman named Imani Rhodes, whose parents she had known for decades. She never explained why. She just did it and stepped back. Big Mama used to say, "The tree that gives the most shade never needs to brag about its roots." I thought it was about humility. I understand now it was about something more structural. The shade is what people see. The roots are what make it possible. A tree certain of its roots does not need the world to admire them. Psychologists call this intrinsic validation, acting from internal values rather than external recognition. The difference between doing good because you need to be seen doing it and doing good because it is simply who you are when no one is watching. The rarest form of character, and almost always the most durable. Imani and I took the winter to build carefully. We partnered with 3 community organizations, including a housing nonprofit on Haverford Avenue that had been operating out of a converted row house for over 2 decades, to create permanent legal architecture for the Big Mama Community Land Trust, a real institution, not just a fund, one designed to outlast both of us. We hired 2 full-time community liaisons, young women, recent Temple graduates, both from these blocks, to handle resident outreach and make sure families being pressured to leave knew they had options. By spring, the trust had blocked 2 additional displacement efforts in Mantua, not through confrontation, through ownership, through the patient work of holding title to land that developers needed for their math to work. That is how communities protect themselves when they do it right, not dramatically, durably. Imani and I did not rush whatever we were becoming. We sat together at the corner table on Tuesday mornings, Azalea's old table. We talked about the trust, about the neighborhood, about Mr. Earl's ongoing negotiation with his doctor over cream quantities, which Mr. Earl was clearly winning on principle. Some mornings we did not talk at all, just sat in the shop, in the neighborhood, in the light that came through the front windows the same way it always had. That was enough. Lila graduated from Drexel University's College of Medicine that May with the highest distinction in her cohort. I did not go. That moment belonged to her, her mother, and Azalea. That afternoon, a message from a number I did not have saved. She walked across that stage today. The whole family was there. Thank you, Slate. I think I'm finally beginning to understand who you always were. I set the phone down and looked out at Baltimore Avenue. The delivery truck double-parked outside the laundromat. The woman walking her dog past the corner mural. 2 kids on bikes navigating the sidewalk with complete seriousness of purpose. I thought about Big Mama, the 20-year-old Buick, the property notices I used to fold into my apron without explanation, and how Mr. Earl always noticed and never asked. That kind of knowing, respectful, patient, faithful, is rarer than any piece of land. Mr. Earl still comes in every morning. Same stool, same cap, same order. Last week his grandson, 9 years old, treats the counter stools as entertainment equipment, looked up mid-spin and asked, "Are you rich?" I thought about it, honestly. "I have what I need," I said, "and I have people around me who matter." Most of what rich really is lives inside those two things. He considered this, spun once more, decided it was acceptable, and asked for a hot chocolate. Mr. Earl caught my eye, said nothing, gave me a small nod. I gave him one back. This story teaches us three things worth writing down, not on a sticky note, but in the small notebook you keep by the kitchen phone. First, the most devoted people in your life rarely announce what they are carrying. Before you dismiss someone as too quiet, ask yourself what you actually know about what they do when no one is watching. Sit with that question over your morning coffee. Let it take a few minutes. Second, we have all measured a person by the wrong ruler, their job title, their address, the car in the driveway. If someone comes to mind right now, pick up the phone this week, not a text, a call. 2 minutes is enough to say, "I underestimated you, and I was wrong." Third, dignity is not something you perform in a dramatic moment. It is something you practice on an ordinary Tuesday, when no one is watching and nothing is easy. Slate never needed the room to know his worth. That is the whole lesson, and it fits on one line. Thank you for staying with this story, with Slate, with Imani, with Mr. Earl, and with the memory of Big Mama, who understood everything long before the rest of us caught up. He just needed time, and he was patient enough to wait. These powerful stories were written by real people with deep emotions and life experience, with AI serving only as a supportive tool to help polish the language and deliver valuable lessons of justice, kindness, and resilience to millions of viewers. Production team story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Wynn. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Wynn. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.